Welcome to the May 14th Finance Committee meeting. Tonight we're continuation of budget discussions for FY15. Hey Rick.
Hey, how are you?
Great.
And just for the record, I just passed out a copy of all the unexpired articles that were previously asked for. So that's, and both Rick and Cindy had mentioned recently that they would like to have a copy of this is the budget document that I've given you in Excel. This is in the KVS system. It's 110 pages. Nobody responded other than Cindy and Rick that they wouldn't mind seeing a copy. I'm happy to throw them on a copy machine right now if people want to have this document. But I'm going to pass it across the table at the moment. And
I was only looking for the one copy in case we needed it.
and, you know, it's, I just want to make sure everybody has what they feel they need.
I think maybe even for our next meeting, if we could have that loaded onto the laptop, so that we could kind of compare and do that.
I can email it to Matt before I go home tonight. I don't think I have a master distribution list, but I just assume.
Send it to me, I'll make sure it gets to everybody.
Okay, that's fine, okay. It reflects exactly what I've given you in spreadsheet format, except that the KVS document doesn't reflect the other amounts to be raised, like snow deficits and things like that have to be raised on the recap sheet, but the budget itself is exactly the same. So there is a format difference, just to be aware of if you're wondering why it doesn't exactly reconcile.
Okay. So you had emailed, after when we were supposed to meet last week, the budget proposal. Do you want to jump into that?
Sure. And I assume everybody's had an opportunity to take a look at it. What you have in front of you is the document dated May 7th. In the document, it actually compounds upon, I don't reiterate the explanation of budget accounts from my prior distribution on April 14th. I can get that if anybody wishes to see that too. The differences are a reduction in the school budget of $167,000, a reduction in fire salaries, a reduction of $79,700, and a reduction in the highway department of $48,000, and $5,000 for library expenses. I think the two items in particular I want to point out is that the fire salaries, since their contract, they're in a three-year contract with probably a 1.5% increase. There are some other contractual items in there. However, right now, as you probably, if you notice, the salary for that department is running very strong. In fact, the chief is going to want to transfer some funds in his expense account for the special town meeting. And hopefully in the next couple of days, before the end of the week, I'll have a draft menu of proposed transfers for the end of this year, not next year's budget. So I've had conversations with the chief, and not that he's happy, but he feels that they can, unless he doesn't have any major long-term injuries, that he's, he feels reasonably comfortable. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he feels like that's, it's a reasonable budget. The highway department amount is in recognition that we are not going to have a full-time new department head on board anytime soon into the next fiscal year. I know you're aware that we will be submitting special legislation. It's on the warrant. The legislation is actually, I should have a draft of that by the end of the week, which I can distribute. It effectively creates a Department of Public Works with which incorporates our park and rec, sewer operations under one department. Would maintain still the elected commissioners and their role in policy and rate setting. It's not out of the question that that's going to take several months to be. You know how state legislation works; it's hurry up and wait. So there's no way we're going to be in a position to hire a department head anyway early in the next fiscal year. So doesn't make sense to keep money there that we know we're not gonna use for that. And those are the major items. I think I don't want to speak for the school department. However, they are willing, everything's a compromise. It's a matter of where you're willing to take risk. And, as you know, this is predicated on using some stabilization money to balance the budget. I mean, that would be done effectively used to reduce the over expenditure of snow and ice, which is at $405,000 the current fiscal year. That's a formatting issue. Effectively, it's an offset to what we have to raise next year. So. Are there any specific questions about what I have been talking reasons?
I have some questions on
Sure.
the whole package that you had sent. The school department memo,
Yes.
the question was presented, what would be the impact of the cuts if we weren't to use stabilization, and it would be an additional 167.5 to them. Mr. Schaefer mentions there'd be a 3 FTE reduction in force.
Well, keep in mind, if, the document you have in front of you reflects a reduction of $167,000 in school budget. That's not, if there weren't stabilization money utilized, it would be an additional cut beyond that.
So this notice from the schools on April 30th, towards the back.
Yeah, let me make sure.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, this is a discussion of what would happen if they cut beyond the 167, which is already reflected in the budget draft document that I gave you on May 7th. So that $167,000, $500 cut is already anticipated. So the memo is the impact beyond that.
Okay. So the 3 FTE
Correct.
would be if they needed more than 167.5. And is that existing positions, or is that positions that wouldn't be filled?
My understanding is that it would be existing positions. Right now, with the 167 cut, they wouldn't have to actually reduce any positions. It would relieve them of any need to have to deal with an unemployment. There'd be some shuffling of the deck. So that's where we stand right now. The other item that, and I had a conversation with the superintendent today, and some of you may, I don't know to what extent you have instantaneous notifications from the state, but the Senate Ways and Means is likely going to be providing a proposal to the full Senate, which provides additional local aid, not in Chapter 70, not in the unrestricted local government aid, but in the charter school spending and some of the other areas, school transportation costs that haven't been fully funded. Now, those are probably going to be, when it comes to Abington, if those are sustained, you're not talking about big money, but you might be talking about $10,000 here, $40,000 there. And it's, there's no, everybody, the school superintendent agrees that any additional state aid should be used to reduce any need for, stabilization, whatever that amount is, whether it's 10,000 or 100,000 in total. So there is, to the extent that there has to be, some sense of compromise, there's no question that is the preferred use of any additional aid that we can predict by town meeting time.
Do we know what percent the circuit breaker is?
We don't, but 68% is what we're predicating. They're predicating
58?
their projections on 68%.
68, okay.
But we don't know. there's no further information as to what that may be additional than the 60%.
Okay.
I know that months ago, when the discussions began, I think there was concern that it would be significantly less than 60%.
Okay.
I wasn't at the last meeting, so this may have been answered, but one of the questions that we had was about money that was in articles.
Slide that mic down there, Liddy's mic.
And whether that would even be able to be used, or how that.
Well, you have, what I provided to you at the request of the chairman last week, a copy of the outstanding balances and all outstanding article balances. So technically, any amounts can be transferred from unexpired as long as there's no obligations against those. The only one that, sorry, getting ahead of myself here. Some of these are projects, obviously, like Griffin's Dairy, et cetera, that are in process. Some of these are mandate issues. But, effectively, when you're talking about transferring article money, that's, once again, one-time non-recurring funds. It's conceptually no different than using any other type of savings. But, that being said, any article amounts, there's nothing we've identified of any substance that could be closed out. Any balances that aren't going to be used. And it's also my understanding that before my tenure that in the last 2 years, the current town accountant has worked to try and eliminate or reduce and close out an awful lot of old unexpired articles just in the last couple of years. So what you see is current.
Thank you.
I don't know if, to me, and I know the members of the committee have talked to me about the stabilization piece, and none of us, I assume, I don't feel great about that. It's the first time in my 20-something years I've ever had to recommend that a piece of savings be used for operating budgets. But I think you have to, look at the context right now, and that, you did use over $500,000 last year. You can't just make up $500,000 in revenue. There must have been some anticipation that, based upon the size of the tax levy and how much, that unless there was some significant increase in state aid, there was going to have to be some piece this year, because there's just not enough revenue to make that up, recurring revenue. So I think, as much as we don't like it, the ability to really wean ourselves down substantially is a step in the right direction. It's not where we want to be, but it's much better than last year. To me, it's important that we work to keep our FY16 personnel obligations as close to FY15 as possible. That's obviously the biggest factor driving future costs, and I know that's a challenge with collective bargaining. We've all been through that enough times, well, most of us have. So we grow back into our recurring revenue. Not that this is not a rubbing it in situation, but I was a little bit surprised to see. I think some of you probably saw it on the front page of the Enterprise, at least in the edition I saw, that the town of Easton looking at using over $1 million, which is surprising to me because that's a fairly affluent community. About $1.25 million in stabilization this year to balance their budget, and it's somewhat of the sign of the times, but I do take some comfort in that we are moving in the right direction, and to the extent that we need to make cuts that reduce that, the need for that, the stabilization piece, particularly with the school department. You're now getting into a little bit more of actual service-connected money, and that's the part that, you have to balance a little bit. People don't pay taxes to put money in the bank while the kids don't have teachers. On the other hand, you have to try to have some healthy, savings account. So it is a balance, and I don't know that there's any right opinion on what that balance is, but there's obviously a lot of pressure, I think, on all of us to try to find that. To me, that seemed like a good balance. It seemed like a good balance where you weren't actually paying unproductive money for unemployment. It seemed like a reasonably good progress from the current fiscal year. Considering some of the unique pressure, the VOTEC assessment of $283,000 additional dollars it was a huge game changer for all of us this year. The impact of a substantial pension increase, which we'll see again next year, obviously a huge factor in not being able to make the jump all the way to a zero need for stabilization. So, but I think it's good progress. It's not the best, it's not what we'd like to see, but I think it's moving in the right direction. And more importantly, and obviously you've got to make your own recommendations, but I think you'll find that at least there's consensus, obviously, with the school committee and school administration too, on a reasonable budget considering the times, and I think it's a basis for getting some consensus on how to try and work collaboratively on maintaining a fairly similar personnel cost going into FY16, because to me that's the key to making sure we're not doing this again next year. And we're all going to catch heck for that. I know I am on my end with our groups, and I'm sure the school administration is too. But this has to be the end of a process. We can't continue to use stabilization money. As you know, it was nice to be able to replace that and more this fiscal year, and I think we have to make that a priority in the fall, that whatever amount we do use for stabilization, that should be the first thing we replace, the first thing we do, in terms of any funds available from free cash or whatever in the fall. But I think it's a reasonable approach under the circumstances, and I think it sets the tone for the future years without a huge risk to the town.
I'll talk loudly so I can carry to a microphone. I've been admonished by many that you can't hear me, so.
I can't hear.
I'm actually going to subtext everything that I have here. So I appreciate you already answering. I'll look at chat as I talk to you. It's just one of those habit things. I'm glad that we talked about this. These are stipulated funds, right? So far as I understand it, which means that the move of 250 out of stabilization is stipulated on the I don't know if it's a tacit policy from the Board of Selectmen, but by putting that money back in the fall. And that's how, as I just understood it, which I'm keen for. I think that there's an argument that we can all paint in any way, shape, or form to spend or not spend the money. As I look outside and I see a beautiful 71-degree day, I don't see many rain clouds in the sky. So the use of stabilization becomes a little bit of a challenge to me, quite honestly. I don't see this as a rainy day period. I think that just as I've learned for folks in your seat, and I know that you've lived through this in other communities, and even here when you were here, is that the sinusoidal impact of revenues and available funds to the town, we seem to be on an upward crest versus a downward. So with that stated, I appreciate and applaud each of the statements that you made. Again, stipulated funds, if we use it, we put it back. The question that I have then falls, I feel remarkably confident in what you described, understanding the budgetary impacts, the personnel impacts, and the service impacts of the departments, that you've thoroughly vetted it, so long as I can, with a good conscience, say that there aren't any superfluous use of funds that exist within the budgets as are currently constructed for FY15, and that it is the intent of the town to restore that money back to stabilization, and it is further the intent of the town to align its capital needs and capital spending with what's anticipated to be remaining in the fall. Because I think that what's outside running parallel to this is a capital budget need for FY15 that may not be contemplated, not by you, just in the general kind of the prevailing wisdom, if you will. It's good to solve this problem, but I'd hate to solve this problem and create a bigger void on the capital side. As we've heard from public safety, there's a couple of large purchases for public safety, both in police, or mainly fire, and then police, with regards to their replacement ambulance and all the accoutrements for that, as well as the cruisers. And of course, at school, with its technology needs for the park exam, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those are my 2 cents.
And then we also have a little issue of the
By fire apparatus.
fire truck
We'll get that.
ladder.
Just gonna bring that up. Go ahead.
I can't see the use of any stabilization funds this year because there's something coming down the road that's gonna be pretty expensive for the fire department. And if we pull money out of stabilization, it's gonna lower our bond rating, and we're not gonna be able to go out to bond if we need a new piece of apparatus. So for that reason, I don't think we should hit the stabilization fund at all, not even $1.
If I could,
Go ahead.
just, you know, I know how you feel. I would just point out that this past year, we did get a bond rating increase, even using $500,000 in stabilization. You know, I can't predict what it'll do to our bond rating, and you know, you get rated, when you go to bar, you get a rating, so I can't predict what that would be, but I have to take some comfort in the fact that, that even with the use of stabilization this past year, we did get a bond rating increase. And that's speculative, Rick, that's speculative, I can't, but the offset is obviously, well, what's the service impact of not doing that? And I think that's the issue for everybody, you know.
Where are we trending for free cash? That we
Well-
have enough to put this back?
Well, you know, when you say trending with, you know, it's hard to say what that is, because there's no budgets closed out for FY.
We'll be getting close.
You know, I mean, the revenue's running very healthy, you know, through the third quarter. But in terms of, until you actually close out your operating budgets, you know, any surplus from the line items, it's really difficult to say how we're trending. There are some particular line items, like health insurance and trash collection, that are performing very well, and that even with some transfers at town meeting that we would anticipate at the special, some of the smaller things, you know, they should be, you know, significant. Well, I don't want to say it's $100,000, but just from those items alone. So, not including any surplus revenue over and above what was predicted. So, like I say, it's hard to say, you know, what to expect in free cash. Well, you won't get a town accountant or a treasurer collector to give you an answer to that, because they wouldn't put their credibility on the line.
Where are we? So VOTEC needed 5 towns to seal their budget,
Yeah,
and that's been done?
That's been done, yes, yes.
I think the VOTEC number is what's pushing me to agree with the stabilization. I don't think that's something that we could predict, or
Yeah,
we
and,
didn't if we should have.
yeah.
That's more than the stabilization number.
Well, in the part that's, that even if there weren't any new students, the funding formula, as well as last year there was also a supplemental appropriation to offset some VOTEC costs. The combination of a couple factors conspired to this extent that even if there weren't any additional Abington students going to the VOTEC, it would still be another $150,000 or so. So there really wasn't, the only thing you could possibly have predicted, and you would have to have been a genius to do even that at the time, was perhaps another 150,000, perhaps. But to have predicted such a major swing is really, yeah. Nobody was prepared for that. I know the other towns that particularly Whitman, that also saw a substantial increase, nobody was prepared, they weren't prepared for this either.
I don't love using money out of the stabilization. I do enjoy that it's a lot less than what we had to use for an operating budget last year. I definitely think you're right, that we're heading in the better direction. But I also have gone through all the budgets with all the departments, and I don't see anywhere where we have $250,000 that we can cut off of a budget without losing personnel. And I'm not, I don't feel that we have an excess in any department of personnel. So, I don't like using the stabilization money. I don't think that it will, my own opinion, I don't think that it will, the amount that we're using, I don't think will, and for the period of time that we're planning to use it, because we'll be, the intent is to replace that money. I don't think that our bond rating will have that negative of an effect for, I think what we're talking about is looking to go out to bond for a ladder truck, or,
Yeah, well, by the time you got out to bond for a ladder truck or whatever, whichever type of aerial vehicle people agree is appropriate, it would certainly will be after the next special town meeting. So, like I said, it's a financial and a philosophical question, and I can't answer the philosophical part for people. That's an individual. I guess my concern is, like I said, where's that balance between having money in the bank while you're laying off teachers? Where's the line? And that's not a line I can tell you. That's a line you guys have to decide for
or
yourselves.
even to expect to be able to have had to take out $500,000 last year and nothing this year.
Yeah.
We were having trouble with the snow and ice early on last year. We experienced the same problem this year.
Yeah, I don't know, I wasn't involved in the discussions last year, so I don't know.
They were very
Other-
similar to this.
Well, other than in anticipation of some significant additional state aid, this is all I'm not sure where anyone thought you were gonna make up $500,000 in revenue this year. So I have to
I think the
believe you were
hope was that the
optimistic
snow
last
wouldn't-
year, yeah. But realistically, when you consider the amount in the budget plus the over expenditure every year that we have to reserve for prior year's expenditures, your trend over 5 or 6 years is isn't that far off from what you've been spending. So we have to make some budget improvement there in terms of the operating budget. But again, it's hard to do that on the tail end of the biggest economic downturn since the Great Depression. That was certainly something we had hoped to be able to achieve at the beginning of the budget process. We also didn't expect that the governor would have set the bar so low in terms of local aid that the one-upsmanship that occurs throughout the budget process with the state legislature was that the bar was set so low that the ultimate impact isn't as great as we would have hoped. So, there's so many factors that go into it. And when you have, and this isn't an Abington issue, obviously this is an issue throughout the Commonwealth, when you have such a significant piece of your recurring revenue out of your control and subject to the political winds on Beacon Hill, it makes it very difficult when the obligations that you have are still subject to state law. And we don't have a choice. We can't peel back, negotiated pay raises. We can't do things because the state hasn't met its commitment. We still have to deal with the commitments, the laws that are in place. So, and I know you guys know most of that. This is more therapy for me than anything else. But
Right, looking ahead,
Yes.
because, like I said, I think we are headed in the right direction with needing to take less money out this year than last year. So, looking forward, and I know you don't have a
Crystal ball?
crystal ball,
No, I just
but
have a
looking ahead, how can we put ourselves in a position to not end up in this position again next year? Like, what do you see long-term?
Well, when you look at your tax base, and you can see from, Prop 2.5 plus some reasonable estimated new growth, you're gonna raise about $900,000 in FY16 in new taxes. You can kind of predict that, even if there isn't any additional state aid. But once again, there's reason to believe there will be, because the economy is improving, the state has money they didn't think they were going to have at this stage of the fiscal year. But even if you look at it that way, you have to almost presume you're going to have, some increase in your fixed costs that's going to eat up a major piece, or some significant piece of that. But even if you're looking at about a $500,000 increase in recurring revenue, I think it behooves everyone to sit in the same room and ensure that the contracts, everybody's on the same playing field in terms of maintaining a level of salary inflation going into FY16 that's extremely modest. That's the key. It's salary inflation. There's no expectation. We're not in an era of major spikes in health insurance. We're not, we know there's going to be, because the pension system is trying to catch up to a schedule,
Right.
that there's going to be about a $175,000 increase in FY16. There isn't any reason to believe there would be such an enormous spike in our VOTEC assessment in FY16. I think there's some reason to believe that we've taken the major hit this year in terms of fixed dollars into that account. So I think we have to more or less come to grips with the fact that we're probably going to have about $900,000 of recurring revenue in FY16, additional dollars. And we need to ensure that we keep our salary growth well within that, understanding that we've got to carve out probably about half of that for fixed cost increases. If we can do that,
I'm sure that's conversations you plan on having
yeah,
throughout.
well, I mean, that's really what it take to at least grow back into we're not in recovery mode yet, and that we have needs. In my opinion, we need additional police officers. In my opinion, I think, there are some other staffing needs which aren't, I don't think nearly as great, but there are some legitimate, and you've heard them, people come, I mean, I don't think we've got a huge problem in town hall, but the town clerk's office, in my opinion, needs to have more staff hours, more availability to the public. But that's small potatoes compared to the need really for 2 or 3 or 4 additional police officers. That's real money. We're not looking at that, I think, in FY16 either. Even though I completely appreciate that it is the obligation of the department heads to educate all of us on what those needs are and why. I think we're looking beyond FY16 before we can start looking at adding any additional staff. So I think FY16 is a year where we have to look at really another year of no additional staff increases, barring any emergencies, and minimal salary inflation. So I think if that can be achieved for FY16, we should be on path to at least being able to balance our budget without any savings. And that's the internal discussions. And the first time we've had this is the first external discussion on that point, but that's the major issue.
Cindy?
You just opened the door to my question.
Oh, boy. Can we close it?
Yes,
Is it too
my
late?
husband would love to close a million.
Is it too late?
And I know I've said this before, and I talked to the school superintendent and the 3 positions, possibly 4, that they may have to lay off. It's not all teachers. I think there's 1. Unless things have changed since our conversation. So this opens the door to me to, I hate layoffs. I hate to say see layoffs, but I said it before, we've got several contracts. If we're in the third year of fire, we're in the third year of the schools, we got some big contracts that are gonna be needing negotiations. We're trying, and I know the department heads, you're trying to, and Peter would be trying to, keep the raises, the increases to a minimum. But I keep going round in my head, and this is probably just me being cynical, that we don't want to lay off, we don't want to lay off, we don't want this, we don't have a lot of growth, we don't. And I think that if we don't take a hard stand and say we're not using our savings right now, we're not going to use savings, that we have to keep everything, we just have to keep things in line. And if we start using savings, we had to do it last year, we've got to possibly do it this year, maybe we'd have to do it again, but we got to stop somewhere and start thinking about, you know what, we're sending, in my mind, a bad message to when we try to negotiate these new salaries or these new contracts, that it's opening the door to say, you know what, they don't want to lose people. They don't want to lay people off, of course they don't. But, so we can negotiate maybe a little bit more, because they'll always use savings to try to save us. They'll always use savings to try to continue to keep paying and doing things. And I think that, in my mind, I have to agree with Rick. We've got some other big expenditures coming up. You can't have a crystal ball as to what the bond rating's going to do, whether it will, won't it, whether we get more. I think the town has to put their foot down finally and just say enough is enough. We have to do what we have to do, and just send the message that we cannot keep, robbing Peter to pay Paul, even if we're intending to put it back. We don't do that at home. We all have savings account for emergency things. We don't have savings account to use it and with the intent of putting it back later and not changing our spending habits. And that's just my position. I can't, I'm just not in favor of taking money on from stabilization at this point. So that's my tirade.
I don't think that it's a result of the positions that we need the stabilization. I really think the VOTEC number of 280,000 is something unexpected. I don't want to pull money from savings either. I don't think that that's the best solution.
I just feel that it sends a wrong message.
Can I
That,
make another point? And again, as I said earlier, people have their own philosophical view of this, and I appreciate that. You also, one of the things I alluded to earlier, or stated earlier, was that, a major piece of every municipal budget, or almost every municipal budget in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, is state aid. And when you look at Abington, for instance, and the amount of state aid this fiscal year is about $1.3 million, real dollars, not inflation-adjusted dollars, less than it was, 10 years ago. And you put what the town has had to use in savings in that context. Now, I wasn't here, obviously, but I think on the surface, it's hard to say the town has been, loosey-goosey with its money. I mean, when you look at the relationship between those numbers, if the state had maintained a level of aid that was, even a level dollar amount that was consistent to a decade ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And there is a legitimate revenue problem that the town of Abington and the government of Abington didn't create, but you're subject to dealing with it. So I do think that it ought to be part, at least, of people's understanding of what got the town in this position, and that it's not going to, you're not going to get out of this in 1 year what took a decade or more to get into. So that's the way I view it right now, and I don't have your institutional history, but that's the way I just see it, looking at just raw numbers for the last several years.
This is less a statement about ideology and more a statement about, or more of a question rather, as it relates to kind of presumptive fact. In requesting a document as it relates to unexpended funds that may exist in previous town meeting warrants, so article money. I'm forced to draw back to a question that we've asked last year, and we're compelled to ask, I'm at least compelled to ask this year. And I tally about $100,000 of funds that are clearly not needed for the original stated purpose because they're just sitting. They're sitting without any intent of being used in the future, or sitting as a safety net. And here's the challenge. forget stabilization for a second, that's just my opinion, fine, you're gonna use it, it's stipulated funds, you're gonna put it back, that's grand. But when I asked my question as it relates to superfluous funds, to me, a fund that may or may not be superfluous would be that $75,000 school chairlift from 2 years ago. An example of superfluous funds are funds that aren't even, that are remaining in a balance for storm repairs from 2 years ago. One would assume that any necessary repairs to the high school would have been done, so you have 10 grand sitting there. Maybe that's money that should be asked to be returned. Same difference with the fire department's antenna from 2012. We have our relationship with Holbrook. We have a whole bunch of relationships. The question's gonna be, is the money hasn't been used.
Right.
7 grand of it's been used, you still have 20 that's sitting there. The challenge and question back is, we're all putting skin in. We're looking for level service across the board, not looking to reduce services. If that's the case, then do we take steps and move forward? Now, notice, I purposely am avoiding the SCBA piece. Why? Because those are needed as PPE for the fire department. He still has funds that are available in there. But even so, as I look through the departments, when I look for sick leave buyback, I mean, those residual funds, they're tiny. They add up to be about $1,100, but they're still there. And they're there and they're sitting. They're not to be, but they're not gonna be used for that further purpose. They've already paid it out. So it's residual, so that money to me should be given back. I understand that it can't be used for this budgetary process, but the intent is there to say, we asked for an amount, we didn't use that amount, we're not gonna spend that amount, we're gonna give it back so it can be rolled in and for future use as free cash.
And I would agree with you completely, but I would point out that some of these projects, the fire antenna project is well underway. It's been in front of the zoning board, it's a permitting process that it's in the midst of it, there's a vendor on board. I mean, these things are happening.
Which is
This-
fine,
The
perfectly
school,
fine.
the 75,000, the school department would be seeking to use that, to transfer that out, to be used that for textbooks, so they can reduce their budget this year for proposals, so.
How can they do that? That's a question, I apologize.
It's town meeting has to make a transfer.
That's right, they have to make that, because
Yes.
we earmarked it for a very specific
Right,
purpose.
so you close out this
We
article.
tried to use it last year to help offset the school's budget, and we met a remarkable amount of resistance to just that.
Well, I think maybe members of the FinCom prevailed upon school administration to think about that again,
Cindy?
perhaps.
Well, I was saying, I know they're using it, well, they have the article in to swap it around and change it from the Garaventa to the book budget, so they have dropped that by 75,000, because we sat and we looked at it one time, and I asked Peter about it, and I said to him, I know textbooks, you have to have so much in your budget every year to replace supplies and materials, but that just seems like an enormous amount to carry like every single year. You're not gonna replace that much textbooks like every year. You're gonna do some, and some. So he thought it was a good idea to do that. And those other things, I gotta agree with Sean. If we're gonna put up a new school, if we're gonna do stuff, and they do still need, things that, like the 40-something thousand that's still sitting there, or, or the technology I know they will use. The storm repair, and I think that 31,000 for the general repairs, they're talking about, like, if they have leaks in the school and things like that, they want that money to be there to be able to use. But again, it is still sitting there, and I agree with Sean, there's some other things that probably maybe could come out of here. Like, now the landfill, can you address the 15 in the landfill? Is that something we have to have there? We haven't even decided what we're doing with that yet, or is this a project that's still underway with another 15 to spend out?
Yeah, part of the funds is for the permitting requirements for the landfill. For instance, last month, the town had to submit the comprehensive site assessment. Again, it's a lot, and now we're into the third phase of the overall permitting process with DEP. I call it a permitting process. It's more of an assessment and decision-making process where some of these options are fleshed out a little more in detail, and that's part of what these funds are paying for that will lead to the capital project. So but But I would agree with Sean to the extent that, when you look at some of the larger ticket items, like the 75,000 and the fire antenna project, which is, again, well underway, and you look, and you eliminate some of those larger numbers, you know, you're conceptually talking about the same thing. If you wanted to use these funds to help with a budget problem right now, you're still gonna have the same, you know, funding gap in FY16. You have, the money's in stabilization, but, you know, it doesn't provide you any recurring relief in terms of revenue. And so, while it makes sense to try and close out as many of these as possible, absolutely. And again, like I said, it's been it's come to my knowledge through some of you and the financial staff that has been somewhat of a priority the last couple of years already. That's not the kind of money that's going to, I think, dramatically alter the course of the budget process.
Can, not for this town meeting, but for the fall town meeting, could work be put in and close these out, and could it go from the unused ones, and the first one, $534, could that go from here with an article into stabilization and just close these ones out, and it's 500 here, 1,000 here?
You could transfer them. With an article, you could transfer them directly into stabilization.
Can we do that? Is that something we can look at for the fall when we're moving the money?
In fact,
Whatever there is to move into
if
stabilization.
it helps, I mean, obviously, you know, I think it's obvious to everybody, my position is to try to get, you know, people to coalesce around a budget that maybe not everybody likes, but people can live with. So that is part of I see it as part of my goal, okay? And in doing that, what I think might be helpful is, because I don't want to get off target here, and I would be helpful, I think, if perhaps I offered to get the finance committee and obviously the selectmen too, and a statement from the appropriate department as to the status of every one of these articles. I would be happy to do that. It would be good for my institutional knowledge too, obviously, so, because some of them do go back a few years.
Could we couple that with the goal of trying to get them off by the fall, the ones that aren't needed?
So, Mr. Chairman, maybe you just make a modification to that request. Maybe you say, if the town manager is able to get that statement of use or status, rather, then maybe we add an element in there, status and a statement of anticipated use, and then internally, your office can adopt a policy saying that, geez, if it's not intended to be used, whatever it happens, whatever the number is, 6 months, 9 months, then it should be moved back in, and then the department should be compelled to ask again, because the need or time for when you asked it, things may have changed.
And again, I think I would be happy to do that. I mean, I think it's a good exercise anyway, but I want to keep us on track, and I'd make no bones about the fact that my goal is to try to get you all to agree to what I proposed, because I think it makes a lot of sense. And I know, Cindy and Rick, I know you're reluctant, and I fully appreciate that, and I respect your opinion on the matter. But I do think that something that's a basis for a better product in FY16 that keeps the school committee, school administration, the selectmen, and to a great extent, the department heads working in the same direction through this town meeting, is helpful in achieving that goal. So that's my speech, for what it's worth.
I just have one additional comment. If we took money out last year and it went into salaries,
Yeah.
that's a one-time thing, right?
Well, it went into technically offset the snow and ice over expenditure, but we all know that really is to meet the bottom line requirements of the budget. We all know that.
So if you do it a second year in a row, doesn't that set a precedent? So these unions can say, hey, you did it twice. Give us our money.
Well, I will say that's under our control. That is, I mean, that's under the control of me, the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, and ultimately with regard to school contracts, it's not under the town meeting jurisdiction, which, But I mean, there is control over these items. It's not like it's completely out of our hands. The problem is, and it's not, in my opinion, the problem isn't the precedent issue. To me, and you know this as well as anybody, it's the fact that there are systems in place beyond our control that deal with the larger contracts that, you have the Department of Labor Relations, the Joint Labor Management Board, that effectively can mediate and make orders in terms of police and fire contracts. There's mechanisms that drive requirements, in terms of school contracts, There's no real mechanism in place other than, third-party arbitration on a clerical contract. Well, clerical contracts don't cost us a lot of money, but the big-ticket items, the mechanisms that are in place by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, those drive costs, at times well beyond our ability to control them. I don't know that that's been a major history, a problem here in terms of your history, having contracts ordered by state agencies, but it is a problem. It's a problem that's statewide, that's outside of it. But I think we can only, in good faith, try to, control our own, revenue growth. Expenditure growth. For instance, I wouldn't predict, for instance, that a DPW contract for FY16 will cost 3%. But to the extent that you offset permanent reductions, possibly with with pay increases, is one issue. To me, it's the overall bottom line inflation of your salaries, not necessarily what that percentage number is. But the staffing here is to the point where it's hard to get by and meet state requirements, because most of what we do is meet state requirements, whether it's your treasurer's office or your assessing department. You're meeting state requirements. That's what you're doing. It's hard to lose much more staff and still be able to effectively accomplish those things. So that's why, in my opinion, it's not, I don't think there's a lot of salary increases to trade for staff reductions anymore. I think, for the most part, it's keeping a lid on salary inflation through collective bargaining that is going to, at least for the next couple of years, is going to be critical to getting back on top here. But these mechanisms that we don't have any control, we have limited control over. We can control our own collective bargaining, we can control our willingness to say no, but we can't control the decision of a mediator at the Joint Labor Management Commission that says, you have money, and we don't really care where you get it from. You need to pay these people X amount. We can't control that. But it certainly helps, and this isn't, don't take this as a criticism of anybody, but several years ago, for instance, there was a contract negotiated with and agreed to with the fire union, okay? And I have no reason to believe that wasn't an unreasonable contract based upon the dynamics, that's fine. But that does set a measurable and comparable bar for the Division of Labor Relations for a police contract and other collective bargaining agreements in the organization. So you have to be extremely careful when you set that bar, what it is, because you're not just setting that bar for the group you're working with, you're setting that bar across the board. And that's the difficulty. You've got to be very careful with that, and I know that, and I'm not looking forward to the latter part of calendar year 14 when we're starting to do some of those negotiations again with the fire group. So
No, I understand that part.
We can control some things, but we can't control everything. And I have to remind people, sometimes I have to remind myself that we are a subdivision of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We are not the Lone Star state of Abington. So
Stephanie?
I had two things. First, just a point of clarification, right now, we still have the outstanding 604.85, correct?
I'm sorry.
No, not with
Not with those changes?
the proposal that was emailed is balanced,
Yes.
if we were to adopt those changes.
But with what coming out of where? I think that's what I was looking for. So the 250 from
250 from
stabilization.
stabilization.
The May 7th cover letter addressed specifically where those items, what the changes were to the previous budget. I will say I did have to fudge about $189 to make it better. I hid that, I'm not gonna tell you where I hid that, just so you know.
I love transparency.
I'm not gonna tell you where.
I think by tomorrow Sean will have found it.
It won't take you long. I'll give you a hint, it's in estimated receipts. It won't take you long to find it, so.
Well, I guess the other, and that's just for the clarification point, but
Yeah.
next, when looking at utilizing that money, either from stabilization or wherever, I think the last time that we met and we, had everything up on the screen and we were looking to go through line by line, what came out of where, what changed, what was removed, what was added. That may be helpful in kind of helping all of us sort of absorb that.
That's what the KVS document is gonna show us that.
Right.
So that will be, everybody will have that tonight.
Yeah, I'll.
And we can go through that tomorrow.
email
Yeah,
it to you.
and I mean, I think that may help move us forward as far as really kind of digesting the changes and the recommendations that have been made. We're kind of looking at it flat. We initially heard all of the wish lists, and I need this, and it would be great if we could do that. Then we have the, all right, well, what could you do without?
Yeah.
And now kind of looking at what kind of has been shaken out of that.
Right, but I will tell you that the KVS document isn't gonna tell you anything more than what's on my cover letter. Just, I don't want you to have any unrealistic expectation as to what that document's gonna tell you, so.
Well, we'll look at the one here.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Oh, I
this
understand.
one.
Say now we're at
looking
this, so
that
that's where it came
side-by-side
from.
comparison, and what we did is
Right.
basically went line by line and, all right, plug in the changes, what came out,
Sure.
and where it came from. And I think that might be really helpful. I mean, I know it's where we were a couple of weeks ago as well, but.
So tomorrow for everybody on that? That's what we'll start with. And hopefully finish with. Yes.
I just wanted to, as far as like the salary increases go, I just want to make sure that we don't blame it all on the salary increases, because we knew those salary increases were coming. That was negotiated, those salaries were negotiated, is this the third year of the
which
bigger
contract?
contracts?
Yes.
So, we all knew that salaries were gonna increase. That was no surprise. We did not know that the VOTAC was gonna increase like it did. We did not know, and it's every year we don't know with the snow and ice. That's always a crapshoot, kinda. So, I guess it all depends on how you look at it. You could say, oh, we're in this position because of the salary increases and because of the, negotiated, the contracts. But you could also say, well, no, we're in this position because of the snow and ice. The bottom line's the bottom line. We don't have the money. We knew, there's certain variables that we absolutely knew about, and one of them is the salary increases, because that's what the town agreed to 3 years ago with those contracts. The other stuff we didn't know about. I don't think that we have departments with any personnel to cut.
Yeah, I
Not
think
250,000.
if you were looking at a VOTEC assessment that rose commensurate to their bottom line budget increase, we wouldn't be having this discussion. It's the formula.
Well, there's several
that
factors.
has
If we
specifically
received,
changed our assessment to the point where, as I say, we wouldn't be having this
The
discussion.
budget's
there's a lot of,
5% increases here.
if we received the money from the state that we had anticipated, if the snow had been what we, had hoped for, and if the VOTAC hadn't increased so much, those three factors would put us in a position where we wouldn't need to take money out of stabilization.
And I'm not, by the way, I'm not blaming VOTEC. I mean, their people have been wonderful to work with, and it's not most of this is formula driven. It's not their fault. And I think we had this discussion previously that, any dollar cut from their budget, 25% of that would have been recognized essentially in our reduction in our assessment. So it would have taken a substantial budget reduction by the VOTEC to have a really meaningful impact on our budget process. So.
I'm not blaming the
Well,
VOTEC,
we
but I
can
definitely
lament it,
think
but
that.
it's not, you
if
can't point fingers, though. It's not what I'm saying.
Not, that's what I'm saying, it's not any one factor, it's not that, I don't think, I guess, that we send the message, oh, we're gonna cover contract salary increases no matter what. I don't think that we send that message by taking money out of stabilization, at this time. Because we agreed to those contracts, we had to pay them regardless,
but
whether we
it's-
took money out of stabilization or whether we cut personnel. You know, it may not, I'm trying to say this carefully, it may not even be the personnel that you think should be cut that end up being cut. It may, where you're trying to send the message to might not be where and the message ends up going as far as cuts. So, because we don't know what each department's gonna do or how that's gonna play itself out.
How many departments are gonna lose personnel? How many departments
With what scenario, Chief?
not using stabilization?
The school department will lose personnel, and, again, if this is apportioned, I got to preface this, if we, $250,000 of stabilization, if it's apportioned the same way the rest of the budget is apportioned in terms of school and non-school, the school would see a reduction of about $167,000. They would lose personnel. The town would, the way I have anticipated how we would deal with the rest of that 82,000 and change issue, is that we would really be unable to fill the department head position in the highway / DPW for an entire fiscal year. And then we would be taking some risks in other areas of the budget. So you would effectively, the positions you would be losing would be in the school department in terms of bodies that exist now that would no longer be here. So one department, again, the highway / DPW would be down at least a position, wouldn't be a layoff, but it would be a position that would be unfilled.
A position that isn't there right now.
That's vacant, it's vacant, right? But I would argue it's a substantial position, though. I mean, it is a, you know, it's the director of the department.
I agree, but
So-
that's gonna have to go through town meeting, and then you're gonna have to advertise and have interviews.
And that's why,
So
and that's why.
we could address that in the fall, really.
And that's why, again, proposing to reduce, you know, the budget right now because there will be a time lag, but, you know, to be back in the fall asking for $50,000 to fill a position for the rest of the fiscal year, I don't see, in that isolated instance, I don't see how that, I don't see that as a benefit unless, like I said, if you're inclined to be accepting of the cuts the school will have to make, you know, as a whole package, then that's what you decide. I mean,
I think it just puts us backwards by not using it. And
the theory, one of the underlying theories here is that we're recovering from a bad economic situation. And last year, you were willing to use some savings which have been replaced. This year, we're still in a mode of holding on. We're not seeking to fill requests for additional positions or additional hours. We're not doing that. It'll cost a lot less just to hold on, but we need another year of the same mechanism that you just used to do that. So, I mean, again, that's philosophy as opposed to anything, and like I say, and I fully appreciate people's objections. I really do. Don't get me wrong. I think it doesn't sit well for me in my first year to have to, but this isn't about me, to recommend a budget for the first time in my life that uses savings to balance it. So, but once again, it's not about my ego. It's about trying to maintain services with as little risk as possible. And again, in the end, you know, you have to really consider, you know, and I do this myself, you know, how much, you know, you pay taxes for services, not to put money in the bank while you're not getting those services. And in determining what those service losses are and how they impact people, that's, you know, that's recommendations you'll have to make too, so I respect that.
Like,
What are we gonna know tomorrow that we don't know today?
there's desire to go through the KVS document.
You'll know who won the Bruins game.
I feel there's some desire to go through and can make a comparison to
Where we started.
the current 109 pages versus the ones that we started with.
Okay, so you don't anticipate any new information.
No.
No, the new information would just be the chance to see that document up there.
And the second question would be, in terms of any cuts, if they came from the school department, do they have a timeline of notification?
They do, but I don't feel qualified to speak to that. I can get you those answers in terms of the actual, I don't know, Cindy, did they describe that to you at all? Was that part of your conversation?
So we'll know that tomorrow.
I'm just curious if you recall
I think there
that.
was one in the first, taken, without the extra 167, I think they've already laid one person off. I think they've already notified one.
Because
If they have to notify, I don't know whether, is it a
The
couple
deadline
weeks?
to
The
notify
deadline,
the
yeah.
teachers.
So they
I'm not
haven't
sure
laid off,
exactly.
but they've notified of a
I
possible.
think they've notified one,
Okay.
but like I said, if they had to do any additional, if they do, it's not for teaching positions. No.
And additionally, 3 FTEs to me doesn't mean anything. What are they complimenting? Is it teachers? Is it secretaries? Is it custodians?
They
Is it
didn't,
teacher aides? What are they?
I was
gonna-
told one teacher, I think there may be a para, and maybe a staff person, but we didn't go into great detail because it's still, and it's better to not say a whole lot, but it's definitely not teaching positions, one.
What are they pegging each position at?
Well, it depends, I guess, if it's the teacher, I would assume it depends on whether they're on that top tier, the bottom tier, and that's, I know, like I said, that the contract a couple of years ago, they didn't go up, I don't think they had a substantial increase, I think their increase was like 1.5 or 1%, pretty much the same, but what happened was all of the tiers tightened up, so everybody started hitting the higher levels at a quicker pace, so they're overall, if I remember correctly, and somebody correct me if I'm not right, it kind of pushed and I think inflated the salaries up quicker. So people are working less time and hitting the top levels. And
I think
my
they're working the same
recollection-
amount of time, it's just that there's no bottom levels anymore. We got rid of all the bottom levels, so now it's like,
well, yeah, and
those
the bottom
steps.
levels are making the steps much quicker now. So that, they're hitting the higher levels of pay a lot faster than they were initially. And I think it was kind of one of those contracts that I think they were I think they knew in the third year it was gonna they were gonna hit that funding cliff. And the third year was gonna be the big problem, that it was not gonna be able to be quite afforded as they had hoped. But I think all union contracts can probably be looked at in the same way, so it can't be.
To your initial question as to what are you gonna know tomorrow that you don't know today, and the KVS document is only going to show you, first of all, you know that you only have so much, there's no latitude in terms of making cuts in the school, direct cuts, and we vote obviously a salary expense budgets, and realizing that bottom line expense can be predicated upon, estimated needs and various items, but fire, it's salaries. Highway, it's salaries. Library, it's going to be apportioned throughout a number of their expenses, probably into periodicals. That's the difference between what you have and what you're gonna see. As I say, I don't know that it's going to, I don't know that you're gonna learn much from that different document that you don't know today, because these would be the only differences you would see on paper.
Well, I guess what I'm looking for is, okay, when I look at the first proposed and then requested, recommended, and then what the difference is, what was taken out, or what was added, what remains in. That was above the, last year's budget and why. And, I mean, even last year, for those of us that were here, that was what we ended up doing, really going through line by line, and taking a look at it. And I think my concern with that is when we talk about using the stabilization money, remembering last year, where we had to do all the different proposals as well when we went to town meeting, because you have to give option one with the stabilization. They vote on the stabilization. Then we can either say, okay, we're gonna go forward with this or that. There's no guarantee on it. If it gets voted down, then we're going in the other direction, et cetera. So we're gonna have to kind of map all of it out as well. I guess that's kind of bigger picture what I'm looking at.
So it's the budget with stabilization, or what was the word we had for it last year? I don't remember.
Option one, option two.
Yeah, well, it's
you know?
option one, or it's with or without.
Taking money.
So the
I
stabilization-
think we just said, this is the budget taking money out of stabilization, this is the budget not taking money out of
And the
stabilization.
impact of it.
Here's the impact.
Contingency budget,
Contingent.
because it's contingent upon town meeting.
Yeah.
Passing the stabilization money.
Plus, I think that's just to Liggy's point as well. I think there is meaningful data in use of tomorrow, not just a lot of noise. But I'm equally curious to see what the responses are as it relates to the warrant article money. And I think that frankly, in my mind's eye, that's gonna be a stumbling block for me. I'd like to hear what the feedback is on that. Why is it a stumbling block? I think that in good faith, we all work together, and I think, Rick, you've done, honestly, yeoman's work working with the group, but I just like to ensure that things that are being left on the table are appropriately on the table.
Are you able to get those answers for tomorrow's meeting?
No, he put the solicitation out, but I think you can make it part, and he manages the town as he sees fit, but I personally think it's time-bound. I think that folks who have that money, and it shouldn't, quite honestly, it should be there. They should have information. They have to account for it, so.
Is there any more discussion on that budget for today?
No.
Okay. Liaison reports? I don't even have an agenda in front of me.
The only thing I was gonna report on was fire truck, but we've already heard about it.
The selectmen, it was Monday's meeting. Go ahead, Rick.
Yes, the selectmen last evening, sorry, what's today?
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Two evenings.
Monday night.
Monday, scheduled a meeting that they, the anticipation was that they could meet jointly with the Finance Committee on the 27th, which is 2 weeks from last night, to hopefully get feedback from the Finance Committee and on your recommendations for town meeting, and so they could presumably make whatever recommendations they feel they need to. And my understanding, it hasn't been their history to do that, at least not in recent times, so
So they do want to meet, or they
they
talked
would
about
like to,
it?
they would like to meet with.
Okay.
And as it happens, the school committee was scheduled to meet in this room on that night, and I talked to the superintendent today, and he's going to see if they could move their meeting to an alternate
For a
location.
joint meeting, Rick, or they want us to meet with them at their meeting? Or they,
Or they would like to
I'm
come
not
to
sure
our
what the
meeting.
difference is.
they want to,
I see. I think,
logistically, whether,
yeah, good point. It was termed as a joint meeting, so.
because sometimes
I see
we've
what you-
had
no,
a selectmen's
right.
meeting where they have
Right.
invited us to come, or we've
Right.
invited them to come, but we have also had joint meetings.
And we need to have our recommendations and everything done at that point. We have till next week. So we need to really start thinking on the timeline. We've gone through most of the draft warrant. There's the one change
Yeah.
that you kind of went around.
Can we get a update on the warrants?
Well,
I mean, can we get a
let's talk
fresh-
about
fresh
the one
copy?
that you started with. The fire.
All right.
Yes, the fire.
I don't know if everybody here knows about it.
Yeah, okay.
I don't.
Somebody should update.
Quick summary, the chief notified me approximately a week and a half ago, and last night we had him in front of the Board of Selectmen, that his ladder truck is inoperable as a ladder truck going forward. There is a stress cracks in the chassis that were determined in an inspection fairly recently. So, yeah, right now it is basically it carries equipment, but it cannot be used as an aerial device and can't even be used as a pumper because the weight of the water in the vehicle is, he's trying to avoid the weight of what harm that could do to the chassis too. There's a question as to whether or not it should even be driven at all, but that's an issue he's dealing with. So it's a 26-year-old apparatus that needs to be replaced. And so the Board of Selectmen opened up the warrant, agreed to allow one more article on the annual town meeting warrant that would allow for the purchase of a aerial vehicle, whether it's a ladder truck or a so-called bucket truck or tower truck. So how that process will ensue, I know there are some selectmen who are interested in forming a committee to work with the chief on determining what the best apparatus is. Because it is the chief's estimates that he's received from several recent purchases in other communities is $1.2 million. So you're looking at a bond issue. The question is whether it is a bond issue inside or outside the levy limit. The treasurer collector did provide me today with an estimate of the debt service costs at 10, 15, and 20-year increments, as well as an estimate of what that would cost on the tax rate if it was excluded debt at various levels. So that's something everybody's going to have fairly shortly, but it's an issue. It's not an operating budget issue for FY15, but it's obviously a substantial financial issue.
So the warrant's opened for that.
Just-
So that's something we're gonna need to discuss.
Yeah.
Can the chief be available for a meeting, our next meeting? We need to get it on the agenda for next week.
I will contact him tomorrow and ask him that question.
Thank you. And I'll get if you let me know, and then when I send the agenda to Deb, I usually send it Friday night.
Okay. Right.
So we can address that.
It's not the news we were hoping for.
No.
On the other hand, to the extent that the town may be willing to vote to authorize a borrow for that, the town could determine at a later date whether it's something that they would like to exclude from the levy or not. You don't have to make that decision all at the same time. Usually it's done at the same time, but it doesn't have to be that way. The question is, can you absorb, does everyone feel you can absorb that debt service? Probably looking at FY16 and beyond, not FY15, into the operating budget and what the impact of that would be. And a 20-year borrow, which would be the maximum you could borrow for a piece of apparatus like that, the first-year debt service would probably just around $100,000 and then declining over 20 years. So
Let's wait till it's on the agenda for next week.
I was just gonna make the suggestion that you may wanna ask Leo to come to that meeting also, because we usually end up with these issues, then having questions also for Leo, maybe kill two birds with one
If you could
stone.
find out if he's available.
I'm sure he'd be happy to. Well, maybe that's overstating it. I'm sure he'd be willing to.
For next week, not knowing what progress we're gonna make tomorrow, with the budget still out there, a few remaining warrant articles, I think we need at a minimum to plan for 2 meetings. And I wanna see if I get any horrible looks or daggers shot at me if I suggest 3, that we at least post for 3.
I think we can be remarkably efficient with 2. I think honestly, right now, the lion's share of issues that you want to do is do a comparative assay of the original budget compared to what we have. His May 7th summary says, this is what I did. So we're doing some checks and balances, and we have to frankly wrestle about the 250,000 stabilization piece. That's really what it comes down to. And he said he's already been, Rick has already offered that he's done this work and his job is to try to get a consensus from this group. The next would be the warrant article. I think that we have enough, personally. I think 3, not for any other reason, just, let's just force ourselves to be a little more efficient, go a little longer if we have to versus 3. I can't do 3.
So we'll see where we are tomorrow and make that decision then. And that'll give us time if we had to post for
What's the
Tuesday.
actual date, Chad, that we? our
At my
last-
slow typing speeds and the recommendations,
Our last possible date
it's Friday, next Friday.
is next
Or,
Friday.
or I'm never gonna type it in time. Anybody have anything else for today?
Dragon speech recognition.
What's that?
Dragon speech recognition.
Have you heard me speak?
There you go.
Does anybody have a motion for today?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Just a basic discussion before you take a vote.
Hmm?
I blame Barbara for all the ills and woes of the budget.
Thank you.
I would like
Rick
to.
will add that into the minutes. All those in favor? Opposed?
To adjourn or Sean's statement?
I don't think Sean's was a motion.
Well, thank you.
Just
I
commentary.
I appreciate you entertaining me on this issue, but.
Sure.
Rick, is your hand tired from taking notes?
Huh?
Is your hand tired from taking notes?
I just put discussion on budget, period.
That works.
You know.
That absolutely, why else do we have